Okay. Okay, I'll just wait a second for folks to join in and then I'll get started. So let's see here. Okay, get this right here. Make sure the live is working there and it's kicking in. Okay. And it looks like we have some folks joining in, so thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you joining me. And I got some great things to show you today. I got some really special things to show you today. And so let's dive right in. Let's go right into it. The first thing I want to do, though, is I want to show you this. And I'll do a close-up of it. But I want to see if you can tell me what this artifact has to do with American identity and finding our identity. So let me do a really close-up. Take a good look at it. I'm going to do a pass-by, okay? And make sure you take a good look at it and see if you can tell me what it has to do with American identity and finding ourselves. So I'll just do a pass-through here, take a look, see what you think, and I'll go up this way so you can see it this way too. First of all, see, here, I'll pull it out just a little bit. First of all, see if you can tell me what it is, and then we'll see where we can go. Hey, Otter. Hey, Justin. Thank you for coming in. Okay, so remember that, and then in a little bit, I'll ask you what it has to do with finding American identity. So I'll put that down there. And so you may have noticed this fellow standing right here next to me. Let me show you this guy. I'll pull it over gently, pull it over here a little bit so you can see it a little bit closer. Okay, we got it on a mannequin. Let me see if I can turn the camera so you can see it a little bit. What is this? A mass printing tool. Ooh, that's a great guess, Honor. A great guess. Keep thinking. Okay, so what is this? What's going on here? Okay, so this is a really cool and unique artifact. This is a breeches and vest that belonged to James Monroe. Okay, so let me see if I can't get the camera a little bit closer on it. What's going on with this? This belonged to James Monroe, and he would have worn this in the late 1780s. He would have worn this around there somewhere. And a museum room. And so check this out. Okay, look at this thing. It's an amazing condition. So this is a vest and breeches that would have been, I don't know if you can see the breeches down here. I wish I could hold it up a little bit better, but unfortunately it's on this mannequin here, so I want to make sure that it's doing okay. But take a look at what's going on here, okay? So what's the deal with this? Okay, it is made out of, it's made out of wool flannel. Okay, it's made out of wool flannel. And let me go on a little nerd tangent here. But does anyone know what flannel, think about, when people think about flannel, they think about plaid, right? Well, flannel and plaid are not the same thing. Plaid is actually a pattern, whereas flannel is the way that they would actually make the fabric. And you know how they make flannel? It's actually really loose. So the flannel is, the weave of the flannel is much looser than it would have been other things. So they would card the wool, right? And then they have the wool out, and so whenever they weave it together, and they would weave it together, and the fabric would be a little bit looser, so it's got a little bit more air pockets in it, right? And I don't know if you could see a sort of example of it. So whenever they weave it together, the flannel actually has more air pockets in it, which makes it actually better for insulation. So that's why you see a lot of this flannel. Whenever you wear flannel, it's really good against like the winter, right? It's really good against air and all that, or excuse me, against the cold and all that sort of thing. So it's made out of wool flannel. If you look at it, okay, it's nothing super fancy, okay? So at this point in his life, James Monroe would have been a lawyer, okay? Around the time that he lived in Fredericksburg, actually. And so there's nothing really fancy sort of going on about it. And let me see if I can get a better view of it, okay? Can you see that? Okay, so nothing seriously fancy. But what I find interesting is what's going on here, okay? And I know it's kind of hard to see, but I'm going to point to it, and I'll show you something else in a second. You see these right here? These things going on? Okay, it's probably hard to see on there, but these actually are little weaves of linen, okay, and they have little tiny sequins on them. And you think to yourself, what on earth what am I talking about? They have sequins on them. Well, that's kind of strange. Well, let me show you something, okay? This is really cool. So I took my little nerd magnifying glass and I did a blow up of these little. So when I'm pointing at this is a blow up of those little tiny dots that you see, or these little tiny marks that are going on. So look at this blow up here, okay? I know it's reversed in here. Can you see what's going on here? Look really closely. And this is linen, right? Little pieces of linen. And they're wrapped in gold thread. Can you see that? They're actually wrapped in gold thread. So when I took my magnifying glass and I did a close-up of it, I was like, wait a minute, what's going, like they're wrapped in gold for thread, and it's wrapped around the linen pieces. So you think to yourself, okay, well, so what? What's the big deal about that? Well, think about that. Think about what that means. So it's wrapped in gold thread, but it's not pure gold, right? It's not actually pure gold on here. And it's sort of wrapped around it. So it would have a bit of a glisten to it, okay? Especially like in the daylight. And I always talk about the candlelight versus the fluorescence. Can you imagine candlelight reflecting off this gold? Okay, so there would have been just a little bit of flicker on here, a little flicker of gold, a little bit of fanciness, but it's not overdone. It's kind of interesting to think about, okay? You know, it's not overdone. So whenever he would walk into a room or, you know, was walking around town, again, it has that thing of like, you know, it's fancy enough to sort of be included in the room, but it's not overdone. And it's very, very reminiscent of James Monroe's individualism and the identity that he was coming up with. So he's coming up with this identity of who he is and where his place is in the world. And part of who he was he was very sort of, he was a humble guy, but he was also and dignified, but he also knew that he wanted to belong in the room. So again, I talk about this again, but this is really reminiscent. So you got these gold weaves going around here, and this gold thread going around here, and it would glisten, and it would be just enough to sort of like make the point, but not enough to overdo it. And that's his identity. And I always talk about, you know, the identity of the sort of the American identity in general and what they were trying to create. And that's why when I wanted to show you this right here, this is what I want to talk about when I talk about like finding identity, what that means. So this seems like nothing, okay? It's actually a razor strop, all right? So let me pull this out. It's actually a razor strop, if I can pull this here. And what's interesting about this, and let me read this on here. It actually has writing on here. Yeah, I'm getting old, excuse me. All right, so it says on here, this tablet was expressly made for, and I'm trying to read this correctly, James Monroe, President of the United States of America. Now, here's the kicker. It says right here, at the special instruction of an American gentleman now in London. Okay, so what? But look what's on here. Can you see that? Really close up? Look what's on there. That's right. There's an American eagle on there, a symbol of America. Okay? It's a symbol of America. So here's a gentleman from London was sending James Monroe a razor strop, and he, from London, put in the symbol of American identity. So you think about that, you know, Americans at that time were struggling with who they were and what they wanted to become, what they wanted to be. Now, you may ask yourself, well, so what? That's just an artifact. True, it's just an artifact. But that process is not just in artifacts, okay? It was in everything, and it's still in everything. Finding our identity. Like, think about that. It was expressly expressed in literature, okay? What am I talking about? What do I have mean? How is literature related to artifacts like this? Well, they are. Literature is related to, it's all related. You have folks like Henry David Thoreau, right? He's a transcendentalist who wrote distinct American works like Resistance to Civil Government. And he wrote, of course, Walden, right? Very distinct American style that was created in the 1800s. Walt Whitman, a humanist, he was also called the father of free verse, right? The father of free verse. And he actually Walt Whitman distinctly set out to write an American epic, okay? Something that was not European, that was not something else. It was our identity. It was who we were. So he was writing an American identity. What did he come up with? Leaves of Grass. He's the father of free verse, which, you know, doesn't do rhyming. Free verse, think about it. Free verse, that's about as American as it gets. And that's in literature. That's not an artifact, but they're related. They're both related. You know, and individualism was being promoted by the Romantics, by the English Romantics, right? Yeah, sure, they were English, but, you know, if you think of Wordsworth, things like that. But they were influenced by the French and American Revolution. They were influenced by us. They were influenced by that identity, by that individualism. And how do I know that about the Romantics? Well, I may or may not have an inside person who may or may not be my mother, who may or may not be a full tenured professor of English. I'm not saying one way or another, but anyway, that's how I know about the English Romantics. So you think about that, and then you have someone like Emerson, okay? He was a transcendentalist, right? And he, in his essay of American Scholar, think about that. Emerson, this is a literature guy, okay? This is not an artifact. This is literature. Emerson, he wrote, and I actually have it here. Well, let me get to the quote in a little bit, okay? So what I'm saying is I'm relating these two pieces together because here's an expression of American identity and individualism. The American identity was individualism, right? And here's an expression of James Monroe's individualism and his identity, what he wanted to become, what he was being. And that struggle continued throughout the early 1800s and keeps going. So as benign and as simple and as weird as it seems to have an artifact like this talking about individualism and expressing American identity, this is an express example of it. And we struggled through that all throughout our history, and we're struggling to this day. But I also will say that it permeates every aspect of our culture, our artifacts, our literature, and who we were. And so let me read you this quote by Emerson, okay? So Emerson says in his essay, American Scholar, "Our day of dependence, not long apprenticeship to the leaning of other lands, draws to a close. The millions that around us are rushing into life cannot always be fed on the sheer remains of foreign harvests. Events, action arise that must be sung, that will sing themselves." So what's my point? Well, my point is that our material culture reflects who we are and continues to reflect who we are. And it's been that way from the beginning. And it's been that way ever since. And you can see it in these artifacts that are over 200 years old, right? These artifacts are over 200 years old. And that struggle of finding our identity has been a constant. And I don't know where it's going to take us, but I do know that that struggle is very American. Food for thought. Anyway, to sum up, once again, we have a razor strop that was given to James Monroe by an admirer in England that's actually living in London with the American eagle up on the top here. So a symbol of American. And then we have this amazing vest and breeches that was worn by James Monroe in the late 1780s. And you can see that it has those little sequins on there. And again, let me show you, just sort of brushed up, let me show you the sequins with the gold wrapped around the thread. And there you go. These two artifacts represent struggle for identity and struggle for who we are. And that's about as American as it gets. So thank you for joining in. I really, really appreciate it. I wanted to point attention to on June 11th, this Thursday at 5:30, we're going to have a magnificent discussion with Tim McGrath, who is an award-winning author, and so we invite you to join in live for that. So thank you so much for joining in, and thank you for coming. And again, if you have any questions anywhere, feel free to contact our website. If you give a chance, maybe share this video and give our page a like. We certainly appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay, goodbye.